What would you do if someone tried to take your seat on the most important day of your granddaughter's life, simply because they didn't believe you belonged there? In today's powerful true-to-life story, we meet Langston Reid, a 72-year-old veteran who shows us that honor doesn't always speak, it stands still. What began as a graduation ceremony quickly turned into a moment of truth that shook the entire room and the internet. And when 5 unexpected men rose to their feet in silent unity, the meaning of loyalty, dignity, and legacy was forever changed. If you believe some stories are too important to forget, then please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel for more stories that speak to the soul. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a moment. Now settle in, because this is a story you'll feel long after it ends. At 72, Langston Reid didn't walk like most men his age. He moved slower, sure, but not because of weakness. It was the kind of slowness born from discipline, from years spent rising at dawn in combat boots and saluting the flag before most folks poured their first cup of coffee. A former lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, Langston had served 3 decades in uniform, from the rice paddies of Vietnam to the burning sands of Iraq. But on this particular morning, he wasn't thinking about battlefields or medals. He was thinking about Amara, his only granddaughter, his heart, and today she was graduating. The sun rose hot over southern Alabama as Langston backed his old Buick into a shaded spot near the South Ridge University Gymnasium. The car still had his late wife's church fan folded in the glove box, a small floral reminder of quieter days. She had passed 5 years earlier, and though time had dulled the sharp edge of grief, nothing had filled her space. They had raised Amara together after her parents died in a highway accident when she was just 6. Langston, once the hardened commander who barked orders over radios, learned how to braid pigtails and pack lunchboxes. Now Amara was valedictorian, top of her class at one of the most prestigious universities in the region. And as he stepped out of the car, smoothing the creases of his well-pressed army dress blues, Langston felt a flutter in his chest. Not fear, not quite joy. Something deeper. Maybe fulfillment. Maybe just a promise kept. He walked across the parking lot with measured steps. His left knee always flared up in the cold, a gift from a roadside explosion in Fallujah. But today it was steady, strong, just like the photograph he kept in his inner jacket pocket. Amara at age 6, missing a front tooth, perched on her grandma's lap on the front porch swing. Inside the university's grand gymnasium, the crowd was already thick. Balloons floated, families cheered. The whole event was being streamed live on YouTube to thousands of viewers, alumni, donors, and proud relatives around the country. Langston showed his printed VIP pass to a student usher who barely glanced at it before waving him forward to the reserved seating area up front. That's where he was headed, front row, seat D6, reserved for the family of the valedictorian. He didn't come for applause. He didn't care for small talk or the noise of celebration. Langston had only one goal, to sit quietly and watch his granddaughter walk across that stage. He had buried friends. He had stood in gunfire. But nothing meant more than this moment, this day, this seat. And as he entered the cool air of the gymnasium, unaware of the conflict brewing just ahead, Langston Reid carried with him more than medals and memories. He carried legacy. And legacy, as the world would soon see, does not move easily. Langston took his seat with a quiet dignity that seemed to settle around him like an old wool coat. The gym's hum of conversation and rustling programs faded into the background as he reached into his inner jacket pocket. His fingers brushed something soft at the edges, a worn photograph, yellowed at the corners. The paper thinned from years of being folded and unfolded. He unfolded it gently now, like it might tear if he breathed too hard. There she was, his wife, Lorraine, holding a young Amara on her lap, both of them smiling as if nothing in the world could go wrong. Lorraine had always worn her strength behind her softness. She wasn't loud, but when she looked at you, it felt like the world held still. That photograph had been taken on their front porch one late spring afternoon, just after Amara's 7th birthday. Langston remembered the way Lorraine had tugged Amara's hair into 2 tiny puffballs, uneven and stubborn, and how she had laughed at the mess while Langston pretended to scold her. He stared at that photo for a long moment. Then he lowered his eyes, lips barely moving, as he whispered so softly the words might have vanished into the air if anyone had been listening. "I kept my promise, Lorraine." His voice caught, rough like gravel. "I said I'd be there, front row, watching our girl walk that stage, and I meant it." There was no need to say more. Lorraine wouldn't have needed the details. She would have known what this day meant. She would have known that Langston hadn't just shown up in person. He'd carried a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and second chances into that one folding chair. He slid the photo back into his pocket and straightened his spine. Whatever happened from this point on, whether the speakers were too loud, whether anyone questioned why he was sitting there, he would not move. That promise wasn't to a school. It wasn't even just to Amara. It was to the woman who made him softer when the world tried to make him hard. And no force on earth was going to keep him from keeping her final wish. Not today, not ever. Langston adjusted the crease of his trousers and stepped slowly toward the front section, where a bold white placard read, "Reserved Honors Family Seating." His polished black shoes tapped against the hardwood floor of the gymnasium. Each step measured, precise. The rich blue of his army dress uniform caught the light, a glint from the silver eagle pinned on his collar, the ribbons on his chest worn not for show, but because they were part of who he was. People noticed, and not all of them smiled. A woman in a floral blouse leaned toward her husband as Langston passed, whispering behind a program. The husband turned to look, once, then again, and quickly faced forward. On the other side of the aisle, a teenage boy nudged his mother and pointed, not at Langston's medals, but at the color of the man wearing them. Langston was used to it. He'd walked through airports in uniform and been called sir by some and ignored by others. He'd worn the same jacket into veterans' halls where the welcome was warm, and into board meetings where he was mistaken for the driver. Some people saw honor, others saw threat, and a few only saw the color of his skin. Still, he walked on. When he reached the VIP row, he paused to double-check the seat assignment. Row A, seat D6, just as printed on his ticket. A pair of gold star balloons bobbed gently nearby, tied to a folding chair, where a beaming white couple in matching t-shirts that read "Proud Grad Parents" had already settled in. Langston nodded politely as he moved toward his seat. They didn't nod back. He reached the row and stood for a moment, not wanting to squeeze past anyone. A student usher in a red lanyard walked by, clipboard in hand. Langston raised his hand slightly, signaling for assistance. He didn't want to be disruptive. But the usher didn't stop, didn't even look, just kept walking. Langston stood there holding his program, his VIP ticket still visible in his hand. After a moment, a younger woman 2 seats over finally leaned aside to let him through, offering a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're fine," she muttered, more to the floor than to him. He eased himself into the seat, careful not to bump anyone with his uniform jacket. The chair wobbled slightly under him, but he didn't shift. He simply placed the program neatly across his lap and took a breath. The stage up front was still being prepped. Students in gowns milled behind a curtain, and faculty members gathered near the podium, reviewing cue cards. Laughter bubbled from the bleachers. Cameras flashed. The energy of celebration rippled through the space, except in the few feet surrounding Langston. It was subtle, but real. Eyes glanced over, then away. Smiles that should have come with "good morning" never arrived. A few people leaned slightly, as if making room without being asked. One woman clutched her purse tighter against her side. Langston sat tall. He didn't shift, didn't explain. He wasn't there to make anyone comfortable. He was there because his granddaughter was the valedictorian, and this seat, this exact one, was where he had every right to be. He folded his hands loosely over the program and looked toward the stage, letting the tension settle around him like smoke in the air. They didn't know who he was, and in a few minutes they'd wish they had. Langston had just settled his gaze on the stage, focusing on the banner that read, "Southridge University, Class of 2024, when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps behind him. They were quick and deliberate, with the unmistakable rhythm of someone on a mission. A shadow fell over his shoulder. "Sir," a voice said flatly. Langston turned his head slowly. Two men stood in the aisle beside him, dressed in black polo shirts and khakis, with Benton's Security Services stitched just above their left breast pockets. They weren't police, no badges, no emblems of authority, just contracted muscle with earpieces and clipped radios. Both looked under 30. The one who had spoken first stood firm, jaw tight and arms crossed in a way that tried too hard to look in control. His name tag read Dean. The other, Keller, stood half a step behind, eyes darting from the road to the stage like he wasn't sure if he wanted to be part of this or not. "Can I help you?" Langston asked calmly. Dean didn't answer right away. He looked over Langston's uniform, his medals, his pressed collar, and clearly didn't care. "This seat might be taken," he said, voice clipped. Langston blinked. "I have a VIP ticket, assigned seating, row A, seat D6. Dean didn't reach for the ticket. He didn't even glance down. "We received a report this row's full. Someone may have been double booked." Langston kept his voice even. "I've had this ticket for weeks. It was mailed to me by the university, directly from the dean's office." Dean shifted his weight, clearly not expecting pushback. "Well, we've been told to make adjustments as needed." Langston raised an eyebrow. "Adjustments for whom?" There was a pause. Dean's eyes flicked to Keller, then back to Langston. His voice dropped half an octave, trying to sound polite but landing somewhere between patronizing and dismissive. "You might feel more comfortable sitting toward the back, sir. We just don't want any confusion." Langston stared at him, not angry, not startled, just still. His years in uniform had taught him that silence, properly used, could be louder than any shout. After a few seconds, Langston spoke. "I'm exactly where I was asked to sit. This is my seat. I'm here for my granddaughter." Dean folded his arms. "Sir, we don't want to escalate anything. There are other open chairs. Let's not make this more complicated than it has to be." Langston exhaled slowly through his nose. "It's only complicated if you ignore the facts. The ticket says D6. I'm in D6. If you'd like to take it up with event coordination, I'll wait right here." Keller took a small step forward and opened his mouth, but Dean raised his hand to stop him. He leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice into something meant to sound friendly, but carried the chill of warning. "We're asking nicely." Langston's eyes didn't move. "And I'm declining respectfully." Around them, the noise of the gym had started to soften. Conversations paused. A few heads turned. The tension was like humidity, thick and rising. Dean's expression tightened. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist." Langston adjusted his shoulders slightly. Not defiant, just deliberate. "Then you'll need to explain that to the thousands of people watching this ceremony live. Because if you're about to remove a decorated veteran from a seat he earned in front of his granddaughter in the country, you'd better have more than 'we're asking nicely.'" For the first time, Dean looked unsure, and in the silence that followed, the air changed. Langston didn't raise his voice. He didn't move, but the room had. Across the gym, near the edge of the bleachers, a junior media student named Ethan Briggs adjusted his camera lens. He was part of the university's live stream crew, assigned to capture wide crowd shots and reaction moments for the official Southridge YouTube channel, which had been broadcasting the graduation live since the morning. He zoomed in toward the stage, catching a faculty member straightening her notes. Then something caught his attention. Movement in the front row. Two security guards standing over a seated man in uniform. The camera lens lingered for a moment, curious. Ethan didn't know who the man was, just that he wasn't moving, wasn't arguing, and yet somehow the entire row had tensed around him. Something in the posture, something in the way the man didn't flinch. Ethan panned a little closer. The image on screen sharpened. A black man in full army dress blues, chest full of medals, calm as a mountain. Two guards, one speaking, the other hovering. Ethan wasn't trying to stir anything up. He was just doing his job, documenting the day. But in that quiet moment, the lens told a deeper truth than the ceremony on stage ever could. Unaware of the weight of what he'd just captured, Ethan's feed rolled live to thousands. And one of those viewers was sitting in a recliner just outside of Houston, sipping coffee and watching his TV screen cast from his phone. Marcus Hale had once served under Langston Reid in Mosul, Iraq. He had taken orders from the man. He had watched him lead men through ambushes, patch up wounded soldiers under sniper fire, and once, single-handedly dig a trapped private out from under a collapsed mud wall after an explosion. And now on his screen, he saw that same man being approached like a trespasser at a high school gym. He leaned forward, narrowed his eyes, and muttered, "Oh, hell no." Marcus reached for his phone and opened a group text thread, labeled simply, "Iron Dogs, Last Stand." It was the name of their old unit, now a quiet, persistent thread that lit up a couple times a year, on birthdays, Veterans Day, or the rare call for help. But this wasn't just a casual check-in. Marcus didn't wait. Reed's being disrespected. Live. South Ridge University front row. Tune in. Send word if you're close. Within 60 seconds, 4 red receipts popped up. Then, on it. Bishop, already in town, heading there. Meeks, you sure it's him? Torres, positive. That back doesn't bend. Never did. Marcus. He followed up with a still frame from the stream, a clear image of Langston in his seat, chin up, eyes fixed ahead, the security guard leaning in too close. The replies came in fast. ETA 12 minutes. Inside already. We'll reposition. Reed stays seated. From around the state, some already in town visiting family, others just a few miles out, the Iron Dogs began to converge. None of them were dressed for ceremony. None of them were invited. But they didn't need programs or tickets. They needed only one reason. Because there was a code. Because 30 years ago, in the middle of a desert storm, Langston Reid had told a 20-year-old sergeant, "If they come for you, I'll stand in front of them first." And now, all these years later, the promise was about to come full circle. Dean shifted in the aisle, his arms folding tighter across his chest, his stance now more defensive than assertive. Langston hadn't moved an inch, but the tension in the air had thickened. It was no longer just a man refusing to give up his seat. It had become something else, something unspoken, yet undeniable. Then from the far left side of the gymnasium, a man stood up. No words, no fanfare, just a presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a charcoal gray sports coat over a crisp white shirt. Colonel Marcus Hale. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and though his face bore the calm of a civilian life well lived, his posture said otherwise. His arms folded slowly across his chest, and his eyes locked onto Dean with the weight of someone who had stared down much worse and walked through it. People near him quieted. They could feel it. They didn't know what they were witnessing yet, but they knew it mattered. Across the gym, in the second row of the east bleachers, another man pushed himself to his feet. He used a single black crutch, his right pant leg neatly pinned where a limb once was. Sergeant Javier Meeks. He didn't look for anyone's approval. He just stood there, upright, unwavering. Then came a third. From the back right corner of the gym, nestled among a group of grandparents, a man in a denim jacket with a folded American flag patch sewn onto the sleeve rose. His eyes, sharp and narrow, swept the room like he was still watching for movement beyond a scope. Sniper Elijah Torres. One by one they emerged, not together, but connected. Medic Jordan Lyle stood from a seat in the middle section. He wore a ball cap pulled low and held it to his chest as he looked toward Langston. His presence radiated quiet reverence, the kind you can't fake, the kind born from binding wounds under fire, from waiting to see if a heartbeat would return. And then finally, from just 3 rows behind Langston, Lieutenant Bishop stood. He didn't move forward. He didn't speak. He simply placed both hands on the seat in front of him, bowed his head for a moment, then lifted his chin with purpose. None of them spoke. They didn't have to. In silence, they created a perimeter, not of protection, but of principle. A formation with no formation, shaped by loyalty, memory, and something the room didn't quite have a name for. People turned in their seats. Parents stopped adjusting their cameras. Children nudged their mothers. Even the MC on stage paused mid-sentence, glancing off to the side. The gymnasium didn't go silent. It went still. Dean shifted again. The bravado in his stance faltered. He glanced at Keller, who looked like he suddenly wanted to be anywhere else. The security radios at their hips buzzed faintly, but neither man reached for them. Langston didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He knew. He could feel it, the way he once could on long nights in desert wind. When he called, they came. And sometimes they didn't need a call at all. Colonel Hale took one slow step down from the bleacher and into the aisle. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. But his very presence was enough to ask the only question that mattered. Do you understand who you're talking to now? And from that moment on, the tone of the room shifted permanently. Dean's jaw clenched as Colonel Marcus Hale stepped forward into the aisle, his movements slow, deliberate. He wasn't posturing. He was declaring. Not with words, but with the stillness of a man who had stood his ground in places where silence could get you killed, and speaking too soon could cost lives. But Dean didn't take the cue. He squared his shoulders and smirked, the kind of smile that belonged more in a locker room than a graduation hall. His voice came out sharp, slicing the air. So what now? Just because the man served in the army, he gets a free pass? Special treatment, that it? A few gasps rippled from the crowd, but no one moved. Langston remained seated, his hands still folded over his lap, eyes forward, jaw tight. He didn't need to respond. Marcus took one more step, standing fully in the center aisle now. He looked directly at Dean, and for the first time, his voice carried more than weight, it carried warning. He doesn't need special treatment, Marcus said, his words clear and low, the kind that didn't rise to command attention. They demanded it by being calm. What he has, Marcus continued, is something you'll likely never understand. Dean laughed under his breath, but there was an edge to it now, brittle and unsure. And what's that supposed to mean? Marcus's voice didn't rise. It dropped a half octave. He has honor, a life of it. And when a man lives with that kind of weight long enough, he doesn't need to shout about it. He carries it in his spine, in his silence, in how he refuses to move, not because he's stubborn, but because he's grounded in something far deeper than you could ever reach. For a long beat, no one said a word, not the ushers, not the parents, not the students watching from the side stage, and certainly not Langston. Because this moment wasn't his to fight, it was being fought for him. Near the edge of the gym, standing just outside the light of the main floor, a tall man in a brown suit leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His name was Alan Trevors, vice principal of student affairs, and once, long ago, a second lieutenant who'd briefly served under Langston Reid during their early military careers. Back then, Trevors had buckled under pressure during a logistics failure in Qatar. Langston had written a damning after-action report that stalled Trevors' promotion to captain. Trevors never forgot it, and when he transitioned into education, eventually climbing the ranks at South Ridge, he carried that resentment quietly, tucked under polite emails and faculty meetings. And now here he was, watching the scene unfold just yards away. He didn't move, didn't step in, didn't even gesture to his staff. He let it happen, maybe not actively encouraging it, but not stopping it either. And that, in moments like this, was its own kind of permission. Dean looked toward him now, seeking validation, maybe support. But Trevors offered nothing, just a flick of his chin, as if to say, finish it quickly. But the crowd didn't want quick. They wanted clarity, and it was Marcus Hale, standing tall in the center aisle, who gave it to them. The man you're trying to remove, Marcus said slowly, he gave 30 years to this country, led men through fire, buried brothers, raised a child who became a scholar, and still showed up today not to be seen, but to bear witness. He has more right to that seat than any name printed on a guest list. Dean's mouth opened, but no words came, because now others were standing. Parents, grandparents, a few veterans seated in the back who had been quiet all morning. Not marching forward, not yelling, but rising, like an invisible tide had finally turned. And Langston, still seated, still silent, but surrounded now by living proof that dignity doesn't need permission to exist. Dean took a small step back, not enough to retreat, but just enough to show he'd lost his footing. Because in that moment, the room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to something older than policy, older than paperwork. It belonged to the kind of truth that doesn't need applause, just witnesses. While tension held the gymnasium in a taut, collective breath, the world outside its walls had already begun to stir. The moment Ethan Briggs' live-stream camera panned over Langston Reid, still seated, still steady, surrounded by 5 silent sentinels, the internet caught fire. What had started as a routine graduation stream with modest viewership had surged past 15,000 live viewers within minutes. Then came the comments. Who is this man? Why are they trying to remove a veteran from his seat? This is disgraceful. It didn't take long before someone clipped the confrontation and uploaded it separately. The title read, "Decorated Veteran Harassed at Granddaughter's Graduation. Stay silent, stay seated." That video, less than 90 seconds long, began to spread like wildfire, and with it came the hashtags. Let him watch, Langston Strong, Nashun Honor in Silence. Within the hour, the tags were trending across social platforms. Celebrities, veterans organizations, and even a few state politicians began retweeting the clip, some demanding answers from Southridge University. The image of Langston Reid, stoic in full-dress uniform, refusing to rise under pressure, hit a nerve that went beyond protocol. It struck something universal. In the comments sections, thousands of strangers typed with a shared sense of outrage and admiration. My father served 28 years. He wouldn't have budged either. This man is the definition of grace under fire. Shame on this school. Shame on whoever let this happen. Some called for the removal of the security company. Others flooded the university's official pages, demanding a public apology. But beneath the noise, one message rose louder than the rest. Let him watch. Because it wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about what that seat represented. A lifetime of service, a promise to a loved one, and a dignity that refused to bend, even when surrounded. Inside the gym, the buzz of the outside world hadn't fully reached the crowd yet, but it would. And when it did, the story of Langston Reid would no longer belong to just one graduation. It would belong to every person who ever had to sit down to stand tall. The names continued echoing across the gymnasium, each one followed by polite applause, scattered cheers, and the occasional air horn from proud, rowdy relatives. But there was a tension lingering beneath it all, a quiet anticipation that hadn't been there before. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath for one name. Langston remained seated in his front row chair, hands resting firmly over the program on his lap. His eyes never left the stage. His posture was unmoved, but his chest rose just a little higher with each passing second. Behind him, Marcus Hale and the others remained standing, still as pillars. No one had asked them to. No one had told them when to sit, but they wouldn't, not until this moment had passed. Then it happened. The announcer, a faculty member with a carefully practiced tone, paused to clear her throat. She glanced down at the card in her hand, then up at the audience as if she knew this wasn't just another name. She adjusted the microphone. Valedictorian of the class of 2024, Amara Lorraine Reid. The effect was immediate. No scattered clapping, no delayed cheers. The entire gymnasium rose to its feet. A wall of applause surged forward, not because she was top of her class, not because she wore double honor cords or gave a perfect speech earlier that week, but because of what she represented in that moment. Because everyone in that building now understood what it had taken for her to get there. 5 men, warriors, now civilians, brought their hands together in perfect unison. Their palms struck with the precision of a military cadence, firm and deliberate. It wasn't loud for the sake of volume. It was loud with purpose. The kind of rhythm that came from saluting the fallen. The kind of applause reserved not for performance, but for valor. It wasn't a celebration. It was a tribute. Up on stage, Amara walked with poise, every step steady, every breath held. She looked out over the crowd, scanning past the sea of faces until her eyes found his, her grandfather, still seated, still unmoved. And in that second, the noise faded for her. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply nodded. A quiet acknowledgement, a signal between two hearts that had weathered too much loss and shared too many sacrifices to need words. Langston responded the same way, just a slight tilt of the head, just enough to say, "I see you." And in that small, sacred exchange, everything was made right. The ceremony concluded in a swirl of caps, cheers, and camera flashes. Graduates spilled out into the courtyard behind the gym, weaving through clusters of proud relatives, clapping professors, and friends hugging like they hadn't seen each other in years. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting a soft golden hue across the concrete. Langston didn't rush to leave his seat. He waited until most of the crowd had dispersed, until the buzz dulled to a murmur, until the weight of the moment had time to settle. Then slowly he rose, straightened the jacket of his uniform, and made his way outside, each step quiet but full of purpose. Near the flagpole, just past the flower arch set up for photos, Amara stood waiting. She had unzipped her gown halfway, revealing a crisp white dress beneath it. Her cap was now tilted slightly, her honor cords hung proud across her shoulders, and her diploma folder was clutched in one hand. The moment she saw him, she didn't say a word. She stepped forward and wrapped both arms around him, tightly. Langston, surprised by the suddenness of it, returned the embrace gently. Amara didn't let go right away. Her breath caught as she whispered against his shoulder, voice trembling just beneath control. "If they had made you leave, Granddad, I was going to walk off that stage. I swear I was. I would have dropped that diploma right at their feet." Langston pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. They shimmered with the aftershock of emotion she had tried to hold in. He gave her a small, knowing smile. "And that's exactly why you didn't need to," he said, "because you had already won. You walked that stage with your head high. You didn't let anger take that from you. You stood your ground, just like I did." Amara looked down, biting her lip. "I couldn't believe it was happening. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell at them. Tell them who you were." Langston's voice softened. "Sometimes silence says more than shouting ever could." She studied him for a moment, then asked more carefully, "Did you call them? The men who stood up?" Langston exhaled, long and low. He turned slightly, glancing toward the gym entrance where Marcus, Meeks, Bishop, and the others still lingered in quiet conversation, out of the spotlight, blending back into the world like men who were never meant to draw attention. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "Men like that don't wait for a phone call. They feel it when something isn't right. They show up. That's loyalty. That's brotherhood." Amara followed his gaze, watching as one of the veterans gave a nod in Langston's direction and disappeared into the parking lot. "They didn't come for applause," Langston added. "They came because they remembered." Amara swallowed hard. "That's powerful." "It's necessary," he replied, "because respect isn't just what you demand. It's what you protect. Sometimes by standing up, and sometimes just by sitting down and refusing to be moved." The breeze tugged gently at her cords and gown. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Amara stepped in and hugged him again. This time not out of pain or outrage, but out of gratitude. Not just for what he endured, but for the way he did it. For the kind of strength that never had to raise its voice to be heard. The ride home was quiet at first. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windshield of Langston's old Buick, casting long shadows across the dashboard. Amara sat in the passenger seat, her cap tucked between her knees, the diploma folder resting on her lap. She gazed out the window for a while, the events of the day still folding in on themselves, trying to find space in her mind. Langston kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady at 10 and 2, just like he'd taught her when she was learning to drive. The hum of the tires against the pavement filled the silence between them, comfortable, but weighted. Finally, Amara broke the stillness. "Can I ask you something?" Langston nodded without turning. "Of course." "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked quietly. "When they tried to move you, when they talked to you like that, why didn't you say more?" Langston drove for a moment longer before answering. He eased the car into the right lane and glanced at her. Because sometimes, he said slowly, the truth doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. It just needs to be seen. Amara looked over at him, studying the side of his face. He wasn't angry. He wasn't proud. He was just steady, like always. Langston reached into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket and pulled out the folded photograph, the same one he'd carried for decades. He passed it gently to her. She unfolded it, her fingers trembling slightly. There, faded but still clear, was her younger self, no older than 6, cradled in the arms of a woman whose eyes she now saw in her own reflection. "Grandma," she whispered. Langston nodded. "That photo was taken the day after we buried your parents. Lorraine had braided your hair that morning. You didn't want to smile, but she got one out of you anyway." Amara ran her thumb over the edge of the picture. Langston's voice grew softer, almost reverent. "That's why I sat still today. That's why I didn't rise to their ignorance. Because that little girl in that picture, she grew into the woman I saw walk across that stage. And I wanted her to know she didn't have to scream to be strong. She didn't have to fight dirty to win with dignity." He looked over, eyes meeting hers for the first time since she asked. "I endured what I did so that you could stand up without having to tear anyone else down. That's the kind of strength that lasts, Amara. Not the loud kind. The kind people remember long after the noise fades." Amara blinked back the sting in her eyes. "I didn't know it could feel this heavy," she said. Langston gave a small smile. "It's not heavy. It's sacred." They drove on, the town slipping past in quiet blocks. Neighbors waved from porches. Flags fluttered lazily in the breeze. The world had settled, but something inside Amara had shifted. As they pulled into the driveway, she looked over at him one more time. "I hope I can carry myself like that someday." Langston turned off the ignition and rested his hand on hers. "You already did, sweetheart." He paused, then added with quiet certainty, "And now you'll know how to carry someone else when their knees start to shake." She nodded, holding the photograph a little tighter. Legacy didn't live in headlines. It lived in how you held your silence when the world expected you to shout, and in how you showed someone they were worth standing up for, by sitting still. As the sun began to set behind Langston's old Buick and the last echoes of the graduation faded into memory, one truth remained crystal clear. Real strength doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It doesn't come from confrontation or titles. It comes from character. And sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is sit still, stay calm, and hold their ground with grace. Langston Reid taught us something many of us already know deep down, especially those of us who've weathered life's harder seasons. Dignity doesn't shout, it endures. It's in the way we carry ourselves after loss, in how we respond when others question our worth, and in how we choose not to let anger define our legacy. He didn't meet disrespect with fury. He met it with clarity, and that calm, unshaken presence echoed louder than any raised voice ever could. It moved hearts. It stirred a community. And more than that, it gave his granddaughter, Amara, a moment of clarity she'll carry for the rest of her life. For many seniors watching this, Langston's journey may feel familiar. Perhaps you too have been overlooked, underestimated, or told you didn't belong in a place you earned. But take comfort in knowing that your quiet resilience, your lived wisdom, is a force no one can erase. The world may change, but the value of grace under fire remains timeless. And let's not forget the men who stood with him, brothers in arms who didn't need an invitation to do what was right. They remind us that true loyalty doesn't fade with time. It endures through silence, distance, and decades. We all need people like that in our lives, and we should strive to be those people for others. This story wasn't just about a seat at a graduation. It was about how we choose to respond when the world tries to move us. It was about legacy, the kind that isn't hung on a wall, but passed down in the way we live, the way we lead, and the example we leave behind. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of something you've lived through, or someone you admire, I invite you to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story, and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss another meaningful moment. Because on this channel, we believe some stories don't just entertain, they remind us who we are and who we still have the power to be.